Hi, my name is Ryan Hopkins. I am a construction partner at White & Case in Houston. If you watched part one of this series, Project Communications, then you already know that I believe a key part of managing construction contracts is good, clear communication. If you can teach your teams to communicate professionally and effectively, it will reduce their workload and disputes on the project. But nothing will completely eliminate issues on large construction projects, which brings us to part two of this three-part series, contract management. Imagine, if you will, a 22-year-old newly minted engineer, just moved to a new city with a new apartment, a new car, and a new job. Can you see me? The new boss says, "I'm going out of town for the next few weeks to negotiate a new project deal. I want you to take over the construction management of an intermediate foundation system for a new building downtown." Eager and confident, I rushed off to the job site. Well, I didn't know there was a contract or even weekly site meetings with the GC. And 4 weeks later, we owed $50,000 in liquidated damages, and I didn't even know what liquidated damages were. The key to contract management: you must know your contract. I mentioned this briefly in part one of the series, but I'm repeating it here because it is essential. Each team member needs to know at least their portions of the contract, and some provisions are critical to everyone working under the contract. My suggestion is that you take the time as part of Project Kickoff to teach the key requirements not just to your own team, but to your contractor as well. The contract requirements should not be a secret, and highlighting them early sets the tone for how the project teams will work together. So what are some of the key project communication requirements? As I mentioned before, certain forms of communication are controlled by the contract, such as notices. They often have form, timing, and delivery requirements in conjunction with the notice provision. Some of the more important communications are changes, force majeure, amendments, disputes, insurance, and key milestones such as completion points and guarantees. Hopefully you are also aware that in many jurisdictions, lien laws also prescribe notice requirements that apply to your construction contracts. Another key project communication requirement is reporting. Now, the volume of reporting and deliverables required in a major construction contract is staggering. The increase in available data and the ease with which it can be parsed and electronically transmitted has led to the increasing demands for various reporting. The electronic formats and copies should also be specifically stated, and the project team should know these requirements. Document retention and storage: I find that most teams are aware of these requirements, but they struggle to keep up with the project documents required by the contract, your company, and often the government. Finally, confidentiality. Knowing what you can and can't communicate can be just as important as to how you communicate it. So if you've improved your team's writing, you've structured your project communications, and the project team knows the communication requirements of the contract, it's time to know the contractual levers that help you guide the behaviors of the project teams. Generally, a construction contract contains levers that do one of four things to elicit behavior. 1, it changes the scope of work. 2, it changes the budget. 3, it changes the schedule. Or 4, it results in a legal action or consequence, such as affecting the anticipated cash flow. Understanding your options is key for persuading your contractor, subcontractor, or vendor to execute the work. Now, just a side note for my contractor friends, these same levers can be used to guide difficult or inexperienced owners. Now, you may say to yourself, "I'm paying for the work to be executed, so can't I just point to the contract?" But anyone that has been around projects knows that is not exactly how that happens. Throughout the life cycle of a project, as issues and disputes develop, you need to know all of your options to guide the work to completion. So I'm going to briefly touch on the key levers and tools, many of which I'm sure you're all familiar with. Disputed payments and set-off rights. I think that everyone always thinks of this one first, but like acceleration and recovery, disputing payments and setting off against invoices are used as a large stick rather than to effectively manage. Consistent, timely, and clearly communicated issues with invoices or withheld amounts maintains a professional and business-like environment for the project. Additionally, Staying within the contract and showing such discipline and consistency can be an excellent litigation tool to defend against claims. Securities and guarantees. Parties often invest quite a bit of time negotiating securities and guarantees, but don't often use them. I understand that they are viewed as options of last resort during the negotiation process, but again, they are an effective lever. When you have a particularly difficult issue or contractor, drawing a security for protection will quickly get upper-level management attention. Similarly, when it appears there is a disconnect between the project level and business level of a contractor, using the notice provision of a guarantee can be an effective method of elevating an issue, which we will discuss in a moment. I'm sure that you are all familiar with acceleration and recovery, but what I see is that they are often applied too late and with too little planning. Particularly, I see owners either use recovery as a large stick and to provide internal political cover when projects are very late, or as a perpetual planning tool. I also see contractors leverage acceleration into recovering lost contingency and unapproved change orders. What I would prefer to see is that contracts have better reporting requirements that are enforced earlier in the project by both parties. More detailed and accurate reporting can detect issues earlier so that acceleration, recovery, or both can be used to the project's benefit rather than the benefit of one party or the other. I hope that some of you said "or both" in your heads. Yes, what I'm seeing in the market is parties looking for a way to have more collaboration and less of a zero-sum game in construction. One step in getting there is realizing that everyone loses when projects are late. So a better solution is to recognize issues earlier and find a shared solution before they become claims. Change management. The lump sum turnkey contracts of the last decade have certainly seen the contractors develop effective change order strategies, but owners have not done the same. Change management can be an effective tool for managing not only the scope of work, but expectations of the parties. Well-drafted, timely, and fair change orders can also be an excellent litigation tool to defend against claims. Descoping. Certainly, descoping is typically viewed as a nuclear option for egregious delay or major breaches of contract. But don't overlook it as a solution for a range of other problems, such as potential bankruptcy of vendors and progressing non-critical or out-of-sequence work. Audits. Audits is another lever that gets overlooked until there is a significant issue on a project, but it shouldn't. Performing an audit is a good way to insert an apparent neutral third party into issues as they develop, and a good way to gather free discovery. But more importantly, if used early, narrowly, and perhaps even regularly, it is a good way to keep dealings businesslike and honest. I actually believe that establishing a regular audit during construction projects would be an effective method to ensure compliance with obligations under the contract. Warranty. Parties are generally aware of warranties when they begin, when they end, what they include or exclude, such as rip and tear, and whether the warranty is capped. I mention it only because the obligations and limitations of warranties continue to evolve in sophisticated contracts. So I recommend that you stay up to date with legal advice. Performance guarantees are an opportunity early in the project to guide behavior, especially the design, engineering, and procurement of the project. Properly defining the guarantees and equipment to meet your commercial objectives without gold plating the plant limits both your and the contractor's risks. And as a side note, knowing when to stop optimizing and freeze the design is also key to eliminating early delays and cost increases. Insurance and risk of loss deserve their own discussion, but again, fall into the category of early opportunities, for example, during negotiation, to guide behavior and define the relationship between the parties. Title, care, custody, and control are essential for understanding what actions to take in the case of an insurable event, warranty claim, or a bankruptcy, for instance. Indemnities. I'm certain that everyone's eyes glaze over as soon as they find the indemnity provisions in a contract. But understanding the obligations and limitations the indemnity provisions can provide alternatives in a bad situation. Unfortunately, you will probably need legal guidance to interpret them. Suspension and termination. Once again, nuclear options on a construction project. It's likely that if you've reached either a suspension or a termination, then there is little good that can come from it. However, just like descoping, that doesn't mean they should be ignored. And the dispute process can be an effective method for elevating issues away from the site. There are several popular methods, including project sponsor meetings, a project neutral, dispute review board, and other creative options that have developed over the last years. Anything that removes difficult issues away from the day-to-day relationships necessary to execute the construction work will benefit the project by elevating the discussion. So now that we've refreshed on some of the typical levers and tools available, how can they be used to influence behavior and mitigate issues? I was brought in to help a project team on a large project when one of the main contractors began to struggle. This contractor was building modules and skids, which presented some unique circumstances. The contractor's schedule had been trending towards being critically late for the 3 prior status reports. At this point, my team did an analysis of the contract to understand the options and limitations. First, despite the protest from the project team, we issued a formal notice regarding the delay and its known or likely effect to the critical path of the project. Why? This drew a line in the sand, and it was the first point on the timeline in the future dispute. Now, I noted that the project team protested because we often get resistance from the project teams because they do not want to upset the working relationship. Typically, what we find when I hear this is that both parties have been operating outside the contract terms. If a team has been practicing good project communications, then this letter would be routine, professional, and factual. Next, we requested an informal updated status from the contractor and any corrective actions that they were taking. Never overlook a good opportunity to gather important information when the other side is feeling pressure. The next project status report indicated no improvement, so we issued a formal notice requesting a recovery plan and schedule. This became the second key point on the dispute timeline. Additionally, if the contract is well drafted, the obligations and requirements of recovery will be detailed. Typically, I see project teams become consumed during this stage trying to determine whether the recovery will work and what other options there are if it doesn't. However, the legal and executive teams should begin to lay out a full strategy for the issue at this stage. To do that, first we have to understand the limitations of liability, consequential damages waiver, the dispute resolution procedure, and the law applied to the contract. Understanding what the ultimate worst best case could be will help guide our options. In the example I'm giving, we happen to have another contractor nearby that was performing similar work, had capacity, and was performing well. So, while the primary contractor was developing a recovery plan, we began planning an exit strategy. Once the recovery plan issued, we monitored progress closely using our yard team. It was immediately clear that the plan was not going to work. After the next reporting, we provided formal written notice that the recovery plan was not being met and that the delays were accumulating and affecting the overall project. In parallel, we were able to clearly determine what we had title to in the contractor's yard using a quick audit of the delivered materials. We also hired local counsel in case we needed a court order to access those materials. We also ensured that all invoices due and owing were paid at that time, and we made transportation arrangements just in case we descoped, including the permits and other things. When no progress was made, we issued a formal notice of descoping particular portions of the work, leaving a few almost complete skids. Now, this is unusual, but we chose to leave a few pieces because the effect of the descoping on the morale at the contractor's yard was significant, and we needed their participation in accessing the materials, loading them for transport, and transferring the work to another contractor. Once the descoped materials were out of the yard, they slowly completed the remaining work and shipped it. As you can see in this example, reporting was critical in providing the opportunity to set a strategy and take steps to mitigate the delays that could have significantly impacted the entire project. Using formal notices allowed us to create a perfect timeline of the issues and to document proper use of the contract. And while we used multiple levers as we attempted to influence the contractor's behavior and protect my client, including change order, recovery, audit, and descoping, I didn't mention the example, but you can anticipate that we also ended up using set-off rights, liquidated damages, descoping damages, and the dispute resolution procedure. If you join me for part 3, defending your contract, I will tell you how it ended. For now, remember, if you use clear, concise, and professional communication, know your contract, and understand the levers available, you can manage your projects more effectively and reduce the issues on your projects. Thank you.